What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, I thought we would return to the topic of side hustles because it's been a little while since I've talked about it. And so to get a kind of pulse of things, I thought I would put out a poll on Instagram inviting you all to submit your questions related to side hustles just to see what's on your minds. What are you wondering about? And in today's episode, I'm going to try my best, at least, to answer your questions. My understanding of a side hustle historically has been when you create a context that generates extra income. Like, it could include something like freelancing in my mind, but it might not include something like, picking up an extra shift per week for an employer, for example. However, I stand corrected because according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, their definition of side hustle is, quote, work performed for income supplementary to one's primary job. Anything you do outside of your typical work that generates income, according to the dictionary, is a side hustle, and your questions largely reflect that. So here I learned that, I maybe didn't understand exactly what a side hustle is, I guess. I don't know, but we're going to answer your questions from Instagram regardless, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Now, far and away, the most frequently asked category of question that you all asked about is like, what are some of the side hustles therapists can do? Here someone says, what options are there other than therapy for another company? There are a lot of options. Someone else says, what could be possible side hustles for therapists? And someone says, what are some of the side hustles therapists can do? I think this is a great question, and the answer is honestly so expansive that I could probably do an entire episode just on that. Fortunately, there are people who've compiled lists of like some of the most common types of side hustles. I'll link below to an article from Heard that I think is quite comprehensive and covering like all the side hustles that I've heard about pretty much. So you can scroll through that list and see if anything in that list is a good fit for you. And honestly, like that doesn't even scratch the surface because there's so many like specific niche things you could do. I don't want to dedicate this entire episode to listing those out, but if you're having trouble listing them out, ask around, ask your local Facebook groups. There's Reddit posts on this stuff. Like the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But now we're going to focus on some of your other questions about side hustles. As I'm scrolling through, I love this question and I want to answer it next. Someone says, can I survive without side hustles? I only want to be a therapist. Absolutely yes. When I'm making an episode like this one where I'm talking about side hustles and answering your questions about side hustles, I don't at all want to give the impression that the only way to make a living is by having some extra income on the side of your potentially full-time job. If your goal is to generate a reasonable living exclusively by seeing therapy clients, you can absolutely do that. You can do it without working at burnout levels. And I get that it's also a real question for many folks because therapists are on average so underpaid. If your goal is to see exclusively therapy clients to pay your bills and you feel like it's not paying your bills in the way that you'd hoped, there are ways that you can troubleshoot and problem solve. You don't have to take on a side hustle if that doesn't align with what your goals are. Okay, here's a good question. How do you balance running a business and starting a whole new side hustle at the same time? Someone else asked a similar question, how much time per week to spend on a side hustle? To me, I would just say, tailor it to your needs and just manage your expectations accordingly. If you have an extra hour or two per week to give to a side hustle, great. But if you only have an hour or two per week, it wouldn't be reasonable to expect that whatever you're trying to lean into with that time is going to generate the same amount of income or get you there as quickly as if, let's say, you had 10 or 15 hours a week to give to a side hustle. So personally, I think it's a much more reasonable question to ask, how much time do I have to give per week to a side hustle if that's something I'm wanting to pursue? And then to follow up the answer to that question by saying, okay, well, what sorts of things align with my goals that reasonably fit within that amount of time? Okay, and someone asks, how lucrative can providing clinical supervision be? Pretty much across the board, what I hear from folks is offering clinical supervision generally is not particularly lucrative. And I'd like to add on my tag on thought that given that most of the time when we're taking on supervisees, we're taking on folks who are pre-licensed or somewhere quite early in their career and therefore likely quite underpaid, just kind of on average by definition, pretty much. I would say that if you're thinking about taking on supervisees, it has to be motivated by something other than finances. So if you'd like to supervise people from the kindness of your heart because you love training people, and yes, you'd like to be reasonably compensated for that, by all means, I fully support you. But if your goal is to make a bunch of money, please consider some other paths for the sake of our early career therapists. Is it different if you have some highly specialized training and you're supervising folks who are already licensed? Perhaps. I haven't dabbled in that. I know that's a whole world as well. And feel free to chime in for folks who've tried this before, but I imagine it could be reasonable to charge significantly more in those contexts. Someone else asks, is it better to seek a project that is a passion or what can be profitable? I think generally speaking, if you can find something that aligns with a passion, it's generally going to be more sustainable than if your only question is what's profitable. Now, with that said, I think it can be wise to be strategic and say, well, if my goal in having a side hustle is to generate some income, presumably, then we can ask, where do my passions and what's profitable overlap nicely? So if you are in a position where you're able to see what your passions are, sit down, ask that question, and then kind of brainstorm, like, what are my options for monetizing my passion? Can I get creative about this in any way? Like, I think that's going to be a much more rewarding and sustainable route, and it potentially might be a more lucrative route as well. Okay, and kind of similar question, someone asks, how do you balance running a business and starting a whole new side hustle at the same time? For me, I just did an extra 20 plus hours per week on top of my full-time job seeing therapy clients. So for me, it kind of lived in the category of like the same way that somebody might choose to take classes in the evenings in addition to their full-time job. Maybe I might have the capacity to lean into this for a season because it's going to get me somewhere that I'm hoping to get to eventually. If, however, it's not accessible to do that, which I totally understand, then just be kind to yourself and see what time you have available and what capacity you have available and just work within the means that you have there. And there are more questions that I didn't touch on that were more practical, like how do I actually start the side hustle? What to use to create and have many courses? What about using affiliate links? And I love talking about that kind of stuff, and I haven't in a little while. But if you are curious to hear more of my like practical tips of like how to start, I guess, this category of side hustle, it doesn't have to be YouTube, but something that involves generating some sort of online presence, or maybe you're creating something that you're going to sell online, I'm happy to do that. I just don't know how much people are interested in that these days. I'm doing it and I love it, but it's not for everyone, so it may not be something you want to learn about. So if you do, let me know in the comments and I'm happy to address those questions in a different video. Well, I had fun chatting about this. If you're thinking about starting a side hustle, I think my most basic starting point tip is like, can you make a really low bar for yourself and just dabble? Like, just try it out. Like, okay, I don't know if I'm gonna start this side hustle, but maybe I'm gonna meet 3 different people who are adjunct professors because I'm thinking about adjunct teaching, and let me just have coffee with them and see what their experience is like. I'd love to just pick their brain, and no pressure, just try it, just see what you learn. Or, you know, if you're thinking about starting something that involves some level of online presence, but maybe it's like courses and selling stuff, and it's a lot of steps to get there, to say, well, can you choose one social media platform that you're just gonna create a profile for, and like, if the fancy strikes you, to like make a post or a video or whatever format you use and just see what happens. And if you hate it, you can take that data and do with it what you will. And if you like it and you get really into it and you're passionate and you keep posting more, great. That's also really helpful to know. Like, you'll see where you need to go next based on where that time leads you. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Whew, well, thank you for joining me. I enjoyed this episode, and let me know in the comments, like, do you have a side hustle? Are you thinking about doing a side hustle? Are you loving seeing therapy clients? It's your favorite and you want to do it full time for as long as possible? Like, I'm interested in all of it. Like, let me know in the comments. And if you have started a side hustle and found it successful, like any tips you want to leave for other folks to glean from your experience are welcome as well. I appreciate all of you, chit-chatting in the comments together. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.